Guys, thanks so much for joining us. I'm very happy to have on the line Melody Kramer. She's a veteran trial lawyer, a speaker, and author of the book Why Lawyers Suck: Hacking the Legal System Part 1. This interview is not so much about the UCC, sovereign citizenship, and legal fiction. We're going to talk a little bit about that. One of the things that I really want to talk about, though, is Melody stepping up to try to defend the Dortch family, who went through living hell when they were targeted by Riverside County, California authorities because their son got into a little bit of trouble with vandalism at the age of 12, and everything went downhill from there. But before we bring Melody on, I just want to talk a little bit about the Avatar update from my friend Sophia Smallstorm. This came out March 2016, and as fate would have it, Sophia is a mutual friend of Melody and me, and that's how Melody and I came to know each other. And I just want to read this from Sophia's latest. She writes, "Lots of people have been telling me lately that they are feeling out of sorts, not like themselves. I have had it myself, a feeling of fatigue, inability to focus, the sense that you might as well not try to do anything today because you don't feel like you're going to accomplish it well. Some wonder if it's the chemtrails they're pelting us with, or maybe it's the GMOs or the EMF that's all over the place. And there's always that looming dread about how the world is getting worse, day by day. We get the Panama Papers release, and what do we see? We see only the enemies of the West named in the Panama Papers. It's never the big banks, it's never the criminals at Goldman Sachs that are put behind bars and named as criminals. The whole system sucks. In this book, Why Lawyers Suck, really gets to the heart of the matter, and I want to read this passage from the chapter, Eroding of Humanity. Melody writes, "By the first year of law school, the process is taken a step further, testing aspiring lawyers' ability to disconnect their humanity in favor of academic arguments. Near the end of the first year of law school, students are required to participate in moot court, and basically they're given a simple case, but one that they don't agree with. They have to argue on the side of somebody who's done something horrific, and no matter their moral feelings on the subject, they have to do it, or risk getting an F and failing out of law school. It's the first in the slippery slope of losing your humanity." So without further ado, I want to welcome Melody to the show. Melody, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I appreciate you having me on the show. And I can relate with what you're saying. There are days when it seems a little overwhelming when you watch the news and all the things going on in the world and in the justice system. It can be overwhelming.
Yeah, Ken, and I don't usually start my interviews in such a heavy, depressing way, but I really have been feeling the way Sophia describes. And I think many of us are feeling that way because as humanity wakes up to the crimes of the banking system and really the crimes of fascism, the revolving door we see at the FDA and the regulators within government, it's essentially a revolving door between corporations and the agencies tasked with policing those corporations. And it just becomes a little bit overwhelming, Melody, because what we all want is justice. And it's not often that we see justice anymore in this system. Why do you suppose that is?
Well, I think we've allowed it to get way too complicated. And we have another chapter in the book is lawyers can't do simple. We can't do anything in a simple fashion. And the problem is lawyers and judges and everyone within the judicial system, we just get too complicated and detailed such that the people who are trying to get justice in the system can't even understand what's going on. And then, a couple years later, maybe have a trial, but it's cost them their house, their marriage, and everything else. And so there's no real system for justice left because of the complexity of the system. And you were talking about, going back to law in Britain and England before the U.S., all of that stuff. Yeah, our justice system is built off of that, but it's not like it's a clean thing. We pile laws on top of others, on top of others, on top of others. Every time something bad happens, someone goes to Congress and says, "Here, let's pass another law." And then for every law, there's a whole set of administrative regulations to go with it. There's so many ways to break the law that it kind of takes away a sense of law anyway, and it puts too much discretion within the hands of prosecutors to pick and choose of what they're going to treat as criminal and what they're not. And it also results in the United States having the highest per capita of its citizens in prison. It's just become an endless system.
Well, yeah, that's right. And it strikes me that the law system in this country reminds me of the IRS tax code. It continues to get more onerous and more complicated year over year, so even the best tax accountant can't possibly know all of the law. The same is true for lawyers. And, Sophia notes in her newsletter here, oh, what a tangled code. We know that what is called the law is really a massive, ever-growing system of codes called the UCC, Uniform Commercial Code. When we think we are breaking the law, we are often only violating one or another of these codes, which are what lawyers study and learn to work with in law school. And you write, the American legal system is designed such that it is impossible for even an army of people to get a handle on it. It's like one of those sci-fi creatures that keeps growing limbs and spawning replicas of itself until it takes over the entire world. And that's the world in which you live, Melody. That can't be a very fun world to live in, day out.
It is intimidating even for me, and I've been practicing for over 20 years. And in terms of the UCC, that's just one piece of the law. That is literally just one piece of the law. Basically, there are various sets of laws. There are statutes; those are ones written down. Congress passed, their legislature passed them. Um, but then even the bigger amount is case law. And that can go back as far as, I mean, we've had sometimes cases that go back to English common law. If you're really desperate for an argument, the idea with case law is cases are supposed to be considered in the context of how other judges have decided it in the past. But of course, no situation is exactly the same. So you have lawyers coming in with research saying, well, this judge in this place ruled on a similar issue this way, and so court, you should do it this way. And the other side says, well, this other judge did it this way, and so you should follow that. It creates this massive pile of precedent, which, while the concept is good, you want to have some consistency in the law, in practicality, the number of cases you would have to review, even with costly research services that help sort of get a handle on it a little bit, is overwhelming. And so that's what makes litigation so long and expensive. That's one piece of what makes it so long and expensive. Is it doesn't matter how much research you do, you may have missed a case. You may have missed something that happened yesterday that you haven't had a chance to update your brief. So you're in this constant feeling of you never know exactly what the law is.
Yeah, and that's a problem. You mentioned the fact that we've got the highest per capita incarceration rate on planet Earth. And I happen to know that we have 1/3 the population of China and yet twice as many inmates. That alone speaks to a system that's so broken beyond repair that it defies belief. But maybe you can comment on this. Why are so many of the prisons privatized? Why have we turned the incarceration of human beings into a business?
I don't know what the rationales were when they started doing that, but I do see it as a massive problem to the integrity of the whole country, because when you have a profit in keeping people incarcerated, then you need to continue the stream and increase the stream of business by incarcerating more people. There's no incentive then for fewer people to be sent to jail. So I don't know who all owns these corporations that are running these private systems, and I don't have not proven, though I certainly suspect there may be some tie-in with those that have something to do with getting people incarcerated. But the bottom line is it is inherently wrong. And there are plenty of people in prisons and jails that are not a danger to the community. There are other ways of disciplining, if you will, citizens for doing things that the society and community as a whole think are wrong. It doesn't have to be incarceration, and the financial aspect has overtaken the reality and the sense of all of it. There is a huge amount of grant money that's thrown at prosecutors and law enforcement and courts for specific types of crimes. And I've even talked with a couple of people in law enforcement explaining to me that they are under a great deal of pressure then with these funds, these grant funds, to go out and find some of this category of crime. the incentives are wrong that way then. And we have a situation too in Riverside County where there was a massive wiretapping campaign by the DEA in concert with the local prosecutor's office. And the U.S. Department of Justice has repeatedly said that they considered it to be illegal. Um, but the outgoing district attorney who had been complicit in this specifically said in news articles were reported, well, I needed some help with my budget, and so I went along with this. So he was getting financial considerations to assist in this massive illegal wiretapping campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And there are no charges filed. There's no nothing. Even we have the point now where the last couple of weeks, the U.S. Department of Justice is sort of trying to defend these in a case in Kentucky, I believe, where there has been a challenge to illegal wiretaps in Riverside County here in California that were used for eventually for an arrest in Kentucky. And the U.S. Department of Justice is going and defending that, even though they considered these to be illegal. So there's no accountability.
Yeah, well, accountability starts at the top, and in this instance, I would point to the Department of Justice. I just did a pretty gripping interview with John Titus of the Best Evidence YouTube channel. I've talked to James Perloff, F. William Engdahl about these same issues. The DOJ has become an arm, essentially, of the big criminal banks on Wall Street, and the DOJ refused to prosecute anyone at Goldman Sachs for abhorrent crimes committed leading up to 2008 and beyond 2008 that led to the financial crisis. And if there's no leadership at the top, if the DOJ won't do its job, how can we expect anybody else below the DOJ? It's sort of the trickle-down idea of morality. If there's morality at the top, there's more likely to be morality throughout the entire system. And if there's rot at the top, then the whole system turns rotten. Again, getting back to this chapter, eroding of humanity. What happens in law school that causes these people that were passionate young people that wanted to do good to so quickly lose their moral compass?
Well, it's designed that way, and I didn't see it at the time. And I consider myself a very moral person, and I'm a preacher's daughter, for crying out loud. Um, you know, but I wanted to do good in the world. I felt that being a lawyer would do that. And then you go through a year of law school and you get to the end and you're being asked to argue something that you don't believe in. And you think that you need to. You think that's part of the job. And in a sense, it is part of the job, because being able to analytically parse out ideas and concepts and argue them, even though they're not part of your particular moral code, is really essential to be a functioning lawyer. If you are emotional about your client's cases, it will do you in the long run. I've been practicing over 20 years. I started out doing criminal defense and criminal prosecution and juvenile cases. And after about 6 years of practice, I was burnt out, completely burnt out. And I thought, I'll switch to civil cases. That'll help you better. That's fatiguing in a different sense. And then I, defended Dr. Dortch and his family in that criminal case and related civil rights case. And that's, done me in health wise also, because it is traumatic things that you're dealing with, and you're trying to help your client navigate through a system that has become increasingly complex, and in the case I believe in the Dortch case, corrupt. There's only so much you can do, and it's hurtful when you can't do that. You feel like you've let your client down.
Yeah, okay, well, you've hit on something very important that I wanted to talk about. And just to give listeners a little bit of background, and I should let you do that, but I just want to mention briefly that the Dortch family lived in Riverside County, California. They had a son, Zach, who I think at the time was, 12 or 13 years old, who got in very minor misdemeanor trouble with, I think, some vandalism or spray painting some signs, and not a really big deal. But basically in the middle of the night, after some issues with law enforcement, their house was basically invaded by militarized police, and things only got worse from there. And you were kind enough to step up and try to defend this family in court. And we just get into some very broad issues here as it relates to UCC, as it relates to legal name and caps, and all the things that I know I'm going to see in the comments below in this video where people say, you do not need to comply if they can't produce a contract, etc. The problem is that the legal system we have is the legal system we have. Any of this other stuff about fictional personhood or anything else can get you in really deep water if the system we have turns against you. So can you just give us a little background and correct me on anything I've said wrong there about the Dortch family?
Yes, I will just give you a very short version. Their 12-year-old son got in some trouble having to do with some vandalism, spray painting, or writing on some fences and stuff around the area. And he was arrested along with a friend and was um, questioned without his parents present, without an attorney present, and he confessed. I mean, he's an honorable kid, and um, things just went horrendously downhill after that. And piecing it together is a little bit complicated, but the one thing that happened was shortly before his court hearing in juvenile court, a couple days before that, a police officer went down and got a arrest warrant to search the Dortch house from floor to ceiling, the whole thing, supposedly related to this minor vandalism charge, and kind of trumped up the dollar amounts to make it sound like it was a felony.
Mm-hmm.
And they came in like SWAT team to this house of this family where there'd been no legal problems, no police calls, nothing. And
Mom
they
and dad are
came in.
professionals. Mom's a nurse, right?
Yes, mom's a nurse, dad's an optometrist. Kids are in school, doing well. I mean, just nothing. And here they come trotting in the house on a Saturday morning, and they keep the family there. And also, there was a family friend that was also in the house. The wife was away with some friends on that day. Um, but they came in, and for the next 7.5 hours, they kept the family there against their will. They weren't allowed to leave. They went through all the rooms in the house. They went immediately to the parents' bedroom, like some 12-year-old's going to leave contraband of any kind in their parents' bedroom. It's unheard of. So anyway, long story short, at a certain point, they took the 12-year-old away in handcuffs, took him to juvenile facility. By then, he knew his Fifth Amendment rights, and he invoked them, and he ended up getting stuck in juvenile detention hall for another 3 days. Really, as far as I can tell, just because he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights to remain silent. As to back at the house, the dad was handcuffed to a chair in the backyard for most of the afternoon. And they went to the house and assembled all sorts of things to supposedly make it look like there was a mobile drug lab in the house. Most of those items, number one, you look at the items, there's no way, even if they had been all together, that they could constitute a drug lab of any kind of drug. Number two, most of that stuff has been destroyed. And this is not my speculation. This is in the police reports that it was destroyed. Later on, there was fabrication of police reports. There was specific testing of some materials from the house, supposedly because the Dortches had filed a civil rights lawsuit, which they did several months after this happened. You can get the longer version of all this on the Red Ice. It's been a long saga. But 6 months after this search of the house, and after the Dortches had filed their own, without an attorney, their own civil rights action against the police department, Dr. Dortch was arrested without an arrest warrant by one of the police officers that he sued. Going back again to what you had said, the initial complaint that was filed by the Dortches in the local court there, Superior Court, Riverside, was something that was not didn't look like a routine legal pleading in terms of what I usually see. And it had a lot of these concepts about original jurisdiction and I don't know, capitalization of things and whatever. It had all these concepts in it, and I believe someone was kind enough to assist them on that. However, I do strongly believe that doing that painted a target on their backs. Mm-hmm. And we actually received a copy of an email that a police sergeant sent shortly after this case was filed, sent to all the city employees saying they had been investigating this family and that they consider them dangerous because of their political beliefs.
Now, I want to jump in there because that's so important, because we've been hearing for a very long time that some of the talking points from the Southern Poverty Law Center and the DHS, the Department of Homeland Security, has been to warn law enforcement about constitutionalists, about anybody that would talk about the Founding Fathers, about the Bill of Rights. They're brainwashing law enforcement to despise people who love the Constitution and want to use the Constitution as a defense, the foundation of all principles that made our nation great. And for whatever reason, law enforcement is starting to identify those that would even mention the Constitution or the Bill of Rights as potential domestic terrorists. And that's a really terrifying slippery slope into absolute despotism, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And it was very concerning. I wasn't aware of this until I took on this case and started doing some research of my own. By the way, in the term that was used in this email that was sent out was sovereign citizen. Mm-hmm. And the Dortches had not even heard of that term before. Yeah. They didn't even know what it meant. But yes, law enforcement is getting all of this. You call it brainwashing, and I think that may be a fair characterization. But the descriptions they're given of things you should watch out for, and maybe these people are dangerous, includes things so innocuous and of our freedoms as referring to the Constitution. That's incomprehensible to me. I think all of us should carry around a copy of the Constitution. I've got one sitting around the house somewhere here. It's really important. We should be aware of our constitutional rights. And even if people are citing these when they're being arrested, number one, please, for everyone listening to this, be cautious. You can't just say, you can't arrest me because of whatever and think that they're not going to arrest you, because they may well. But the practice of law enforcement looking at those references to the Constitution, referencing this, U.S. as a corporation, whatever, treating that as though that is some sort of indicia of dangerousness, creates an incredibly dangerous situation.
Yeah.
It's wrong, but it's still dangerous.
Well, it's the absolute height of absurdity, and it is really the death of the Republic that could only allow us to have gotten to this point. And I do want to actually back you up a little bit and just remind folks that are listening, who I know are commenting below, saying, the court doesn't have jurisdiction because I'm a sovereign citizen. And the trick that's been played on all of us is that they refer to our legal name in all caps. Here's the thing, guys. That's a slippery slope once you are in this system. And this system has the potential to target you like it targeted the Dortches, and it can make your life a living hell. It's a little bit like the IRS tax code. You can choose not to pay in because the government isn't using our money the way it should. You can make all of the arguments not to pay in. You can say that it's unconstitutional to collect a personal income tax. The problem is, if you don't pay it, they have the guns, they have the enforcement, they have the prisons. And so when we live in this system, we need to be realistic about how to proceed in a legal way to keep ourselves out of prison. Do you think that's a fair characterization? I mean, could things have gone better for the Dortches, do you think, had they gotten your services from day one?
I would like to think so, yes. And I got to see all of this in play because at a certain point in the criminal case, Dr. Dortch made the decision he wanted to proceed on and represent himself, which I'm supportive. That's his option if he wanted to. But I also saw how the court treated that and how the court treated him and the level of disrespect. I mean, there was disrespect to me too, but the level of disrespect to him, coming in and calmly making arguments based on his research in the Constitution. And they treated him, well, number one, they appointed an attorney to speak for him over his objection. Mm-hmm. They appointed a public defender for him.
Which he did not
and
accept, is my
which he
understanding.
did not accept, but the court accepted that
Yeah.
fiction. And so you have this attorney in there speaking on behalf of him, but not speaking on behalf of him. And what ended up with that was that attorney filed a motion with the court and argued to the court that because Dr. Dortch did not trust the legal system, that was one of the points, didn't trust the legal system, didn't want to cooperate with this public defender that was appointed against his wishes. Because of that, there was a question as to his mental capacity to be tried.
Mm-hmm.
And the judge bought that argument. And the judge had him held without bail for 30 days. Originally it was 45 days. I got it down to 30 days. He was held without bail for 30 days for the purpose of doing a mental health examination.
And to be clear, he's an optometrist, so he's taken away from his practice. The family's financial life is absolutely destroyed by this system that does not care about what his arguments were.
Doesn't care. And the point is, even if you have a 5150, which in California is like a mental health psychological hold, that can only be for 72 hours without having a hearing.
Right.
And here in this case, 30 days. There's no need for 30 days. And by the way, we actually, in my research and consultation with my client, I filed a notice with the court explaining that he would not be interviewed by two psychologists, a psychiatrist and psychologist is what the court had appointed, that he would not be interviewed with them because that was violation of his Fifth Amendment rights. And so the day after I filed that document with the court, Dr. Dortch was pulled out of bed like about 4 a.m. from jail. He was taken and put out in a bus in a cage by himself for hours. Eventually, some other people are also brought on the bus. They were taken down to another facility down in Riverside, and this other psychologist or psychiatrist came in to talk to him, and knowing full well that he wasn't going to talk, and he declined, and they eventually took him back to jail. That entire day, we had no idea where he was. It was very, very scary, naturally, for his family and for me also. I had no idea where my client was. And because I knew I had just filed this document that was likely to anger the court, and because personnel at the jail told me that the judge had ordered this transfer of him that day. There's no documentation of that anywhere, but that was what I was told by jail personnel on that day.
I just want to say one thing about this. I've talked about it from day one when I started my YouTube channel. In 2011 was the first time I put up a video, and I talked a lot about the Patriot Act, the John Warner Defense Authorization Act. They've turned the quote-unquote homeland into a domestic battlefield in this war on terror. So some of the stuff that might be going on here might be related to some of that war on terror language, some of the secret documents. I mean, think Guantanamo Bay meets the United States, because they can do whatever they want to Dortch if they've labeled him a domestic terrorist. There might be things going on here that none of us are privy to, including his own attorney, you, Melody. And I just want to say this. You mentioned early on that the DEA had received grants and they were doing illegal wiretapping in Riverside County. Do you think that any of that weighs into what happened here? Do you think that maybe these people were already under surveillance and or after their son committed a misdemeanor, they were put under surveillance, and then maybe they heard some chatter that made these people targets? Do you think that's possible?
I absolutely do, because I know that the DEA was involved because of Dr. Dortch's licensure, and apparently, I don't know all the details of it, but he had a DEA registration number. It has something to do with his ability to, I don't know if it's to do prescriptions or something, whatever. So the DEA actually was primetime involved in this whole situation. In fact, they came and they lied to the office staff and made up a false appointment with Dr. Dortch, and 4 officers came there, and they tried to get him to give up his DEA registration, and they tried to bluff their way into the office to search it.
It's astounding, and it speaks to the loss of humanity that you write about in your book.
Yeah.
It's happening really in all agencies of government. People are putting their biweekly paychecks and ultimately their pensions in front of justice and honor. I don't think the country always used to be this way, but we really are seeing a slippery slope into absolute despotism. It's the reason we have these conversations, is to try to help our listeners in whatever way we can, because so many of us are feeling the way that Sophia described that she's feeling here at the opening of the video. And I think it's because of the loss of the rule of law in the United States of America. Without rule of law, without the Department of Justice being willing to prosecute Lloyd Blankfein and other criminals at criminal banks, without that, we have nothing. We have nothing but a banana republic, and it's very, very frustrating. My hat's off to you, Melody, for being willing to stand with the Dortches and to try to help them. Because if any one of us found ourselves in that situation, we would pray that an attorney would come to our rescue. And you tried to do that, but your hands were tied too. Because in a system like this, not even you could help save them.
Well, and in fact, on the only court appearance where there were no other people there, and that was when Dr. Dortch did not appear, November 19th, I was actually briefly detained by law enforcement.
Oh, my God.
On my way out of the courthouse.
On what grounds?
Well, I'd said something to the prosecutors they didn't like, and that was, I said that if something bad happened to Dr. Dortch, it was on their head. And that had to do with the fact that I knew that when he had been arrested in September, that there was a plan for use of lethal force.
Oh, my God.
And that they had talked with this particular prosecutor just before putting together that plan. And so I made that cautionary statement to the prosecutor as court was wrapping up. We were off the record. We were just putting our papers together. And the prosecutors took offense to that, motioned over to the deputy who was in the court, who got on the phone and called his supervisor, and the two of them stopped me on the way out of the courtroom, and they wanted to have my identification. They wanted to see my driver's license, my address. I said, my address is on every court pleading. Just look at the file. That wasn't good enough. So I gave them my office address. That's not a secret. But I would not give them my date of birth. I would not give them my ID. And I specifically asked them why they were detaining me. They said, well, we need to write a report. We're not arresting you or anything. We need to write a report. And then they proceeded to ask me about, wasn't I upset with the Dortches for not showing up at court that day? I prepared, and wasn't I upset with my clients? I didn't know. I get it. You know, they have been abused by law enforcement and prosecutors and the courts for years. And, you know, I get it. The last thing I am is upset at my clients. I hand-delivered a cease and desist letter the next day to that same deputy. He was nice as pie the next day. I have not had any further problems, but then again, I haven't been in Riverside County, so...
Well, it sounds like you were a victim of the Stasi, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, the problem is that once these agencies, once law enforcement spins out of control, and again, there's no morality at the top trickling down, all bets are off. And if we live in a republic by and for the people, if we live in a republic that's ruled by law, we're in good shape. The problem is, I think we've lost that entirely. Again, as exemplified by the DOJ's insistence of not prosecuting the criminal Wall Street banks. Melody, when we started this conversation, I didn't expect to get so into the Dortch family issue, but I'm glad we did because it really speaks to who you are as a person. I think you've managed to retain your humanity despite being a lawyer. I want to thank
tried to do that.
Yeah,
yes.
I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for trying to defend the Dortches, and I guess where we should leave it before we finish with your book here is where are the Dortches? Where has this ended up? They have a son. I believe they also have a daughter. And this system has really bankrupted them, probably spiritually, emotionally, and financially. Where are they now?
I don't know where they are. The last time I saw Dr. Dortch and his wife Kim was in court after hearing November 5th, I believe. And then on the 19th of November, they did not appear in court. And I have not, they have not called me, they have not emailed me. And by, as far as I can tell, they left voluntarily under duress, I guess is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. Their things were packed from the home where they were staying, and their son is also with them.
Well, I don't know them personally, but I do have something called empathy, and so do my listeners. And for any of us that were to put ourselves in their shoes, your heart really goes out to them. And I'm going to say a prayer for them, too, as soon as we're off this call, because what a terrible, terrible, terrible situation in which to find yourself, and to have nowhere to turn, to have there be no recourse for essentially the crimes perpetrated against them. That's my interpretation here of the crimes perpetrated against them by law enforcement and by a system that was hell-bent on prosecuting them for a misdemeanor that their son committed when he was 12. It's just the height of absurdity, and it's very maddening, and I do thank you very much for trying to defend them. I was following that case more closely early on. Our listeners are really good folks, and we just had James Perloff on, whose latest book is called Truth is a Lonely Warrior, and James emailed me not too long after that interview to say, thanks, you got my book back up to, I think, top 2,000 on Amazon. It had been released in 2013, so it had sort of fallen down on the list there. And we want to support you, too. Tell people how to get this book. Remind us of the title.
Why Lawyers Suck, Hacking the Legal System, Part 1. And you can go to Amazon, just Why Lawyers Suck, and they'll pull it up there. And yeah, if you can put me up to the top of that bestsellers list, I would be so grateful for that. I really want people to start getting more understanding and awareness of what's going on in the judicial system, because I think that is a way to make a difference. And I have more books that will be upcoming soon. So this is sort of the first one explaining a little bit of why lawyers are the way they are. And then the next one we'll tackle is why courts are the way they are. And hopefully this will start discussions, and discussions start thoughtful, meaningful actions for change.
Well, I love your spirit. And guys, thank you for supporting me at SGT Report. As I've said before, we don't have a donation button. So if you want to support me, support the people who come on the show, you can buy a copy of Melody's book, Why Lawyers Suck. And please do. Add it to your library. Share it with friends and family. Because in this case, I can tell you this, Melody Kramer does not suck. She's cool. And Melody, thanks so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
All right. And my thanks to Sophia Smallstorm for helping set up this interview with Melody. And guys, my thanks to you for listening to this interview and for supporting us at sgtreport.com. Real news 24/7, the antidote to corporate propaganda. Much love. Have a great weekend.